But tonight, I want to talk about accessibility. It's one of these topics that can become a bit overwhelming very quickly in web design. At the moment people hear the word accessibility, and I've given quite a few talks in meetups about accessibility, they often think of things like compliance, legal stuff, massive checklists, expensive rebuilds, or somebody talking extensively on WCAG. But in reality, the things that I've come across, most Elementor accessibility problems, or just general accessibility problems, I see they're much, much smaller and a bit more practical than the kind of things that most people would talk. So usually it's inherited websites, sites that have evolved over many years. You get different developers, you get quick fixes that people have put in, you get visual decisions being made under time pressure, of course. Everyone's guilty of that. I am as well. And the sector that I am in, and probably that Paul's mentioned as well, is that when you're doing non-profits and charities and things, there's usually different clients, different board members or shuffling board members, different committees every so often as well, and they've got different views and things. So accessibility problems can come from a variety of different angles. And over time, little things, they start stacking up into big issues. So things like heading structures become messy. Buttons stop making sense out of context because the context changed. Mobile layouts look visually fine, but read terribly on screen readers because people have not put that thought in when they're designing it. Things like animations get added because they look cool and not because they improve the usability overall. So the important thing is most of these problems I'm going to be covering tonight don't require a complete rebuild of the website from scratch. They usually just require awareness, prioritization, a bit of a sensible review process. So rather than trying to cover everything accessibility related, or do a deep dive on WCAG, which I'm sure would all bore you to death, I want to focus on the checks that give the biggest practical return on real-world Elementor websites. So not theoretical perfection, not a 200-page audit, just issues that I see most often, the issues that affect usability the most, and the issues that are flexible without rebuilding the whole site from scratch. Those are the kind of things I personally check first when inheriting an Elementor website and auditing for accessibility concerns. So let's jump into check number one. This one is headings, and so heading structure. It's probably the most common accessibility issue that I see on inherited Elementor sites. So I'm not talking about ones that I build or someone builds from scratch. These are websites that have been out there for many years and have inherited this awful structure. The problem with is that the heading levels often get chosen visually rather than structurally. Users are inside Elementor, they're inside that visual editor. They see shiny things. I do as well. I'm a shiny object person. And logic kind of goes out the window. So what you end up with is things like a page title set as an H4 because it looks better. Text widgets being used as fake headings. H2s skipped completely because someone jumped straight to an H3 or H4. Again, because somehow it looked a bit nicer than the H2 format. It's I see that all the time. I inherited a organization website just at the beginning of the year, and there was an H6 as the title, because they wanted it small, page title. Again, visually. So if people are in Elementor, they're creating these pages visually. So they're not really giving thought to the structure. They're just putting things that look nice. So these things can go wrong after time. It might not look broken on the page. It might look aesthetically pleasing to the client. But it affects how people and certain accessibility tools understand that content. It matters as well for screen readers, how they read it. It matters for SEO, of course, and content structure. And honestly, it makes content management a lot messier when you're trying to, redo all these things. But the good news is that this one is usually one of the easiest fixes. Change the title back to H1, H2, have a look through the structure, maybe tweak a few bits of CSS. You don't need to redesign the page. 9 out of 10 times. You just need to separate the visual style from the heading level and the structure. So I like using this little tool. So checking web page header structure is very easy. I use this Chrome extension. It's called SEO Pro extension from Marketing Syrup. Oh, interesting name. This example, just open the page, click the extension, select the headings tab. There's quite a few headings in there. There's an overview, heading, status, links, images, schema, all that sort of thing. But if you click on the heading structure, and it identifies all the obvious problems. So it's a quick scroll up and down. You can see the order, the structure, the semantic structure of everything. So this example is from one of my blog posts, and you can see that I have a very simple heading structure that's semantically correct. One single H1, the rest are H2s with a couple of H3s at the end in the second image after I've kind of scrolled down through the structure of the extension. There's even an export button if you need to include that page in a report or email to the client for backup and saying just how messy and unstructured it is. But the goal here isn't perfection. It's just spotting broken hierarchy very quickly. You can literally check about 50 web pages in less than 5 minutes. And that's more than enough to spot any patterns and issues that you might see. For example, you might be looking at some blogs, and all their titles, all their page titles is H6 as in I saw. And then that would lead you to the conclusion that the template's probably wrong, things like that. So plenty of give and take for this little extension. I love it. I use it all the time. Check number 2. So we're talking about color contrast now. So this is where design preference and accessibility can really start kind of bumping heads into each other. And I say that as someone who likes subtle design. The problem is that a site can look clean, a site can look modern and beautifully restrained, while still being generally hard for people to read. Just in case you're wondering, I've got a note here. Yep. The background image is a BMW. The company painted it with Vanta Black. It's one of the world's darkest man-made substances. It was a promo in 2019, I think, 2018 or 2019. And when you see this thing driving at night, if you switch its lights off, you just cannot see it. It reflects, so it absorbs about 99.8% of known light and scatters the rest. So there's also some YouTuber in the US. He painted his Humvee, something called Muzo Black, which is the darkest publicly available paint that you can get. Go look it up. It's absolutely crazy. He painted everything, including headlights and wheels and indicators, and drove it around a little bit. Totally illegal, but it comes in this little tube, like half the size of a water bottle, and it costs $30. And he can only paint like a square meter, so he went through like 100 bottles. Spent a fortune, drove it around for 10 minutes for a YouTube video, and then took it to a car wash and washed it all off. So anyway, that's a bit of a side story. But back to color contrast. This usually shows up as things like light gray body text on a white screen, white background, muted brand colors used too softly, things like colored text on colored backgrounds, very thin fonts at small sizes. So again, it might not be the particular color. It could be the font choice and the weight for those. Buttons that look good visually, but don't have enough contrast in them. The tricky part is that contrast problems often don't look like obvious mistakes. Sometimes they can look like design choices. So this is one of the first things I'd probably check on an inherited site, because it's easy to overlook, and it's usually quite easy to improve that one as well. And the reason I take a good look at this is because I've got normal website. I shouldn't say normal, but I've got good website. I'm not colorblind. I don't have problems seeing contrast. So what I see as a website is not what other people would see if they have issues with accessibility. So I want to check. I want to get some numbers back to ensure that there's good contrast there. I don't want to just rely on my judgment, have a look over and say, oh, that looks pretty bad. I want to actually check to make sure that it is accessible. So there's a color wheel there. I introduced my boy to the color wheel for the first time this week when I was doing this talk, to show him what opposites are and things, and why certain colors look really good in different backgrounds and others suck. So a little color wheel there. This is the tool that I like to use. It's called coolors.co, COOLORS .co, so not .com.co. And this is my LearnDash login box on my community portal. So I checked the contrast of that because I looked at that and thought, well, that register text is not looking so good on there. So you can get that. I mean, I know some of the people here are technical, but for those who aren't watching, you can open the DevTools window in your browser, select the div that contains whatever it is you want to measure, and go into the other tab that shows you all the fonts and the CSS style, and you can grab out those particular colors. And I'm sure there's extensions as well you can get just to use eyedroppers. But essentially, you put in two hex values. So I found here that the color of the font is actually black. So it's hex 6 zeros. And the background color is not my brand, orange, which I thought it was, but it's a weird LearnDash orange color, which is F98039. So I compared those together. You just paste the two numbers in, and it gives you this score here. So this tool showed that contrast, 8.17, and it marked that as very good. And I like this tool. There's lots of different tools out there. This is the only one that actually says it's good, very good, poor, rubbish, all that sort of stuff. So because the number itself is calculated from ratios and WCAG specifications and stuff. The lower, the worse it is, the bigger, the better it is, and it goes up to something like 21. But you don't need to understand that. You can just use this tool, put in the two color values, and it comes up with a number. It tells you, is it good or is it bad? And I like that because I like to be able to check things like these logins. These are the high volume places that people come to all the time. I think the reason I thought that might not be good contrast is probably because the font is quite thin there. So again, the contrast is good, black on an orange. But me thinking, looking at that, just would say I'd probably make that bold just to make it stand out. So you don't need a 40-page audit to catch most contrast issues. Just run some of the popular pages through that, the kind of high volume places where people are going to, and just double check to make sure that all those contrasts are working properly. Number 3 is buttons and links. They are one of those accessibility issues that also improve normal usability as well. And the problem is usually context. Visually, we can usually see what a button relates to because it sits under a card, beside an image, inside a section, next to a call to action, that sort of stuff. But when you're running that same page through a screen reader, users may hear links completely separately from the surrounding layout. And it's all about how it's designed and how it's contextually fit together. So if every link says, read more, learn more, click here, it quickly becomes completely meaningless. And I know that was a big thing 10 years ago, but I still to this day go to websites and it has click here or read more. I mean, it's fairly obvious and it should be descriptive, but there you go. So, for example, if you've got a learn more button, if you're listening on a screen reader, it might read something out if it's not structurally correct. And then just out the blue, it'll say, click to learn more. And you're like, learn more about what? Or read more about which article if you've got like a grid of things, or click here for what action. So this is a small copy change, but it can make a huge difference, not just to accessibility, but just to everyone's UI and UX experience for that. So instead of generic labels, of course, you want to make it action specific, learn more about our services, read for the full case study, book a consultation, all that kind of good stuff there. That helps accessibility, but it also makes the page clear for everyone. The screen reading tools for web professionals to use when testing, I use NVDA, which is, I can't remember what it stands for, NVDA for Windows, and on Mac, I believe, I'm not a Mac user, but I believe it has VoiceOver built into the Mac OS. So even testing briefly changes how you think about links. Run 5, 6, 10 pages through one of these screen readers. I guarantee you'll find at least one issue in an inherited website. And they're super easy to fix. Okay, number 4 is alt text. It's one of those accessibility topics that sounds simple until you actually have to write it. One common misconception is that every image description needs an alt text. It doesn't. I had one of my clients that I had last year. They were with an agency before me, and the agency advised them to go through the media and put an alt text for everything. This poor person had been doing this for weeks, and including things like button backgrounds, div backgrounds, all that sort of stuff. So some images are meaningful, some images are decorative, and some images are just there to support the visual design. So this is very much a judgment call. Does this image add information that someone needs to understand about the page? If yes, then describe it in a meaningful image. If no, then it might just be better to treat it as decorative, and just ignore it. The screen readers will ignore it if there's no alt tag. The other mistake is using alt text as an SEO dumping ground. People still do this. So instead of writing something like best web designer, Sydney, WordPress, Elementor, affordable web design, all that sort of things, write what the image is actually doing for the user. Good alt text describes purpose, not keyword stuffing. Number 5, mobile reading order is one of the most Elementor specific accessibility problems I see. And it's very easy to miss visually because the page can look completely fine. So this issue here usually appears when web designers start adjusting layouts for mobile. So reversing columns, maybe you've got a headshot with a bio, but you want the bio up above on mobile because you want, the text first rather than the image. So reversing columns, hiding desktop containers, and create mobile-only versions. That one, it just kills me every time. People still do that. Huge sections, like duplicate the whole page. One for mobile, one for desktop. It just kills me. And moving sections around as well so that design looks better on a small screen. So visually, that might solve the layout problem, but the underlying reading order becomes completely confused. When you have a call to action and you have a heading, a subheading, you've got the text, maybe an image and a button, there's a reading order that people look at that visually and will look at it. Title, subtitle, text, image for context, and the button for action. But if you're moving things around so it looks nice on mobile, when you run that through a screen reader, it just sounds awful. It just sounds stupid. It doesn't make sense. So this is where the visual side looks okay, but underlying the semantics doesn't work, and it becomes an accessibility issue when people can't understand things that are all jumbled up. So the question I ask on an inherited Elementor site is, if I remove the visual design and just read the page from top to bottom, does the content still make sense? Particularly on mobiles, not so much tablets because most of them use a desktop now because they're super high res, but certainly on mobiles, you want to make sure that the content is making structural and semantic sense when all those visual elements are removed. Because if it doesn't, the mobile layout may look good, but the experience can still be broken. So definitely that's one to be checking. Number 6 is motion, animation, and pop-ups. They're where accessibility starts to overlap heavily with usability. And this is where Elementor can be a bit dangerous because it makes things very easy to add. Entrance animations, autoplay and sliders, sticky elements, pop-up offers, moving carousels, little effects of nudging things everywhere. And individually, They might seem harmless and they're probably relevant, like a shaky button to draw attention to a call to action is good, but everything moving all the time is just it's just really bad. So individually, they may seem harmless, but together they can make a page feel very, very busy, very distracting, and much, much harder to use, especially on mobile. The question I'd ask is, does this movement help the user understand or complete something? If it doesn't, then it doesn't belong there at all. Or is it just there because it looked cool when we built it, you know? As I say, a bit of motion can be fine, but if the page is constantly moving, if it's interrupting or demanding attention, accessibility and usability for everyone usually suffers greatly. Number 7, last one here, is my top 7, is forms. So forms are often the accessibility issue with the biggest business impact. So if you were to rank these as easy to hard to fix, or business impact to low business impact, forms, I'd start with forms every single time, because forms are where people actually do something. They contact you, they inquire, they donate, they register, they buy. So if a form's hard to use, the site isn't just less accessible, it's just less effective, full stop. On inherited Elementor sites, I look for things like fields without proper labels, placeholder text being used instead of labels, error messages that are hard to see or understand, tiny, tiny checkboxes, like in font 0.25 rem, and forms that are really painful to complete on mobile because they've got 8,000 mandatory fields. Just thinking about those, just the last audit that I did a couple of weeks ago, they wanted things to be nice and minimal, and that's okay. We can have minimal design, but they removed all the field labels and they just had placeholder text. And they had moved everything into columns, so it was all nice and placed together. But if you read that through a screen reader, the way it says something is very different from the way it visually looks. Your eyes tend to go from left to right, but a screen reader will say things like text field, and then it'll describe that, and then it will tell you the label. So, what you really need is a label first to tell you what the field is, and then an introduction to it. So getting rid of titles and labels is not a great idea. Error messages as well. Sometimes error messages can be at the top. Sometimes they appear as Ajax at the bottom. That's actually below the fold. There's some form systems that do that. Sometimes the error message is in red. And if that CSS has not been changed and your background is a particular color, you can't quite see what the error message is. You know one's there, but you're damned if you know what it is. And therefore, you won't be able to correct what you're inputting. And that can really frustrate people when they're trying to fill out forms and they can't understand where they've went wrong. So a beautiful website can still fail at the exact moment someone tries to take action, as in a form. So forms are always worth checking carefully, not just the one contact form, but the whole suite across the whole website. So let's bring this back to a simple checklist. This is very close to the order that I use when I'm looking at inherited Elementor websites. Depends on the priorities from the client, of course. Sometimes I would go to the form first if they've noticed that leads are down. But in general, it's just the list that I go through. Not because it catches everything, it doesn't, and that's okay. Because it catches a lot of the issues that show up again and again on actual real websites. It's like the 80-20 rule. You want to address 80% of the stuff. 20% of the stuff that gets 80% of the problems done. So I check headings, contrast, buttons and links, alt text, mobile, read and order, motion animation pop-ups, and forms as well. And this is just an accessibility audit. So this is part of a larger audit that I would do on a website. But accessibility is just a small part of that, but an important part as well. So this gives you a practical starting point without turning the project into a complete full rebuild or a huge compliance exercise as well. Again, we're doing that 20-80 rule. We don't want to land the client with a huge bill that's going to scare them away. We don't want to get bogged down in compliance and legal issues if we can avoid it, because our job is to design as well. We can communicate with those departments, and that's fine on particular issues. but we don't want to kind of dive straight into that. We're developers, designers. So it's a really practical starting point, and that's really the point of this talk, is for practicality. Most Elementor accessibility issues are not rebuild problems. They're just tweaks here and there. They may add up, and there may be a lot of them. But from an accessibility point of view, it's usually not a complete rebuild of a website, which is good for clients. They're usually just a prioritization problem. They're usually a tweak in a best practice. They're usually a change in maybe a template file somewhere, and a little bit of education. If you can improve structure, if you can improve readability, if you can improve navigation and reduce that friction, you can make most real-world Elementor sites noticeably more accessible without having to rebuild everything. So I've got some questions here. I'll copy them into chat as well. You don't have to answer them, but they can be a little bit of a starting point for those. So what accessibility issue do you run into most often on an Elementor site or another site? What's the hardest accessibility problem to explain to clients? That could be that H6 thing. They don't see that. They just see the page title and it's small, and that's what they like. What's the craziest accessibility fail that you've seen on a real client website?